I don't even know how to start this
At the beginning.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we are doing something a little different. We're going to do a story time.
Story time.
It is not a video that I'm looking forward to doing.
It's a long story too.
Yeah, it might end up being like a two-part video, but I don't really usually talk about any of this to pretty much anyone. Even there are maybe just a handful of people that even know about all of this, and even they don't know everything. But Isaac keeps telling me that it's something that could be very helpful for other people. So hopefully that is the case. Otherwise, I'm going to feel real.
No, you shouldn't feel like anything. It's tough because stuff like this is stuff that people don't generally want to talk about. It's kind of an emotional topic to talk about. But
it's not uncommon. So.
It's so common, and there are so many people that have been through similar stories to ours, and I think it's important for people to be able to lean on each other in times that like we've had, and it doesn't need to be so secretive. And I know that it feels at the moment and at the time like you just kind of want that privacy, and that's okay, but eventually you have to be able to talk about it and be okay with it.
Yes. So we're gonna try to hold it together, not get super emotional, and we're gonna tell you about our infertility journey story, which may seem crazy because now we have two perfect little humans, but it took us a long time to get there and a lot of stuff to get there. I don't know.
Roller coaster.
Yeah. We got married in July of 2005, and we knew we wanted a family. We had settled on 4 kids because I had said 6, and you were like, heck no, I'll settle on 4. We were married the end of July, and by August, I was like, so how about we start trying right away? So we started officially and actively trying September 1st of 2005. Now, aside from how babies are made, I had no idea, like, anything that it took to get pregnant. Anything. It's totally normal and common that, like, it doesn't happen right away and it takes a few months and all of those kinds of things. I had no idea. So we started trying and it didn't happen right away. And I think I started to do some research. Like, I found a website that I joined to track my cycles, and it had message boards, so I was learning all sorts of tips and tricks, and we did all sorts of crazy things over the years. Like, thinking back all of those years, all the things that we tried that I just like read about or learned on message boards from other people. But so we tried and tried and tried, and after a year nothing happened. So I saw a doctor, an OBGYN that was recommended to me, that a friend uses. And he diagnosed me with PCOS. So that was the first that I learned that I had that. And although it does make getting pregnant hard, it wasn't like a end of the road kind of thing. Like, you can still, it's not easy, but
Just
you
a
can
little
still
blip.
you can still get pregnant. So then he put me on metformin, which is a common thing. It's not just for PCOS. I think people use it for like diabetes and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
But he put me on metformin, and I took that for a while, and it made me feel so crappy, but I took it. And it didn't really do anything. It didn't help anything. And then he put me on Clomid, which, now that I know what I know, is so scary because it was completely unmonitored. He just gave it to me and there you go. Try. And that is so dangerous. But I didn't know that then. I was 22. What did I know? So we did that like for a cycle or two and nothing happened. And so I eventually just gave up on that doctor. It wasn't getting me anywhere. He wasn't really all that interested in helping. It wasn't his specialty. So we
didn't have anybody in our area that was a
No.
specialty either. There were no infertility specialists in our immediate area.
And I think especially then, we were still so young that I didn't even consider something like that at that point. It wasn't until we were older.
We even went through and considered adoption, and we went through the initial part of that, but at the time we were living in an apartment, and we knew that we were going to be building our house in the near future, like within the next 2 years from that point. So we're like, let's just wait until we get into our house, because it makes more sense for us to kind of pursue that once we actually have some additional bedrooms.
Adoption is great, and I still love the idea of it, but they definitely don't make it easy.
No.
And especially, like, money-wise. Like, I don't know how people do it. And I would still consider it, but it's so expensive. We tried on our own, and like I said, all sorts of crazy... Like, you try all the things, like...
And good Lord, this girl talks about message boards. There's a message board for everything.
Yeah.
And
I was the queen.
Yeah. Like, when we were getting married, it was the dot, and then it was infertility stuff, and then PCOS stuff, and whatever, you name it.
But anything that I could find, I tried.
I think it's also important to say that there's a lot of crap online that's not worth your time or effort reading.
So we tried and tried and tried, and it was so hard because I swear everybody around you has babies, and everywhere you look, everybody's pregnant and talking about how their family's growing, and meanwhile you're just waiting. Like, you want it more than anything else, and it's just...
And this, and it's not the right perspective to have, and this is something that we've learned about understanding that there's enough out there for everyone. Right. The abundance is there, but it always seemed like at the time it was like people in the worst possible situations that didn't want to get pregnant, didn't have the means to be pregnant or to support a kid. And when you see that, that's even more frustrating, because you're like, how are these people that A, don't want it, B,
aren't capable
of, and maybe they are, and I hope they are for the sake of their children, but in our minds, we're not fit to be in that position, and then you feel like you have done everything you possibly can to set things up so that you can welcome a baby into the world and do what you need to do to take care of it, and you can't. You just can't. Or it feels like you can't.
2005 is when we started trying. And tried on our own until 2013, right? Yeah, 2013. When I finally had enough. I mean, I'd had enough the whole time, but I finally was ready to do something more. The closest infertility clinic is 2.5 hours from here. I didn't care. I was going to do whatever we needed to do. So we called to set up an appointment, like an initial consult, and it was like months. It was like 3 or 4 months before we could even get into that.
Yeah.
So we finally got in, and the first thing they did was like blood work and checked they did like a TMI, but they did a sperm, what are those called?
Count.
Yeah, they tested his sperm. And they did all sorts of blood work and stuff on me, and everything checked out. Everything was completely normal, except that I had PCOS. So the doctor that we saw actually specialized in infertility and PCOS. So that made me feel really encouraged. And they started us out slow, which was frustrating because we'd already been doing this for so many years. I just wanted to get right into it. But she started me back on the metformin again, and we gave that a few months and nothing happened. So then we moved on to the Clomid again, only this time we did it the right way. You're supposed to be closely monitored on that because things can happen, bad things can happen, as with any of this stuff. But so I would have to go back like middle of cycle. Nothing ever really happened with that either. It didn't do anything. Apparently my body just doesn't respond to that. So,
and the appointments for that alone were rough because she already said we are 2.5 hours away. We were both working full time. It's hard when you're working because you're trying to schedule around what you have to do. And luckily, both of our employers were really helpful. And
shout out to Amber. So we did the Clomid and nothing happened on that. From there, we moved on to injectables. So, do you remember what it was? The actual Gonal F, yeah. So I'd have to go back. I had to go to the doctor, to the infertility clinic on day 1 or between day 1 and 3 of every cycle so that they could get a baseline, make sure there were no cysts and all of that, do measurements, that kind of thing. And then they would give me the shots, the injections, and they would tell me which days to take them, and then I'd have to come back to be monitored to see how many follicles were growing and maturing. Well, I'd have to go back on like day 12, but then I'd also have to go back on day 13 or 14 or 15, or like it was like every day or every 2 days to watch them closely and see what was maturing and how many follicles we had and when was the perfect time to then trigger. So then I'd have to take a trigger shot. It was called Ovidril. That would tell my ovaries to ovulate, to release the mature eggs, and then you do your thing, and then immediately after that, like immediately after your ovulation day, you start taking progesterone. We didn't actually start the injections and things until 2015, the beginning of 2015. So the first cycle seemed like it was going really well. We ended up, I have it written down somewhere, but I don't know off the top of my head, but we ended up with like 3 or 4 mature follicles that we triggered, and we ended up pregnant first try. And so that was awesome. It didn't last long. I think I was like 7 weeks, or would have been 7 weeks along, excuse me, and I miscarried. So that was the first time. It was obviously hard and devastating and all of those things. I don't really like to talk about it.
Well, it puts you in a position where you're like, do I want to do this again? Like, that's such an emotional roller coaster, and it's so hard. And we knew, both of us knew that, first of all, both of us knew that someday we were going to have kids. We could both see it. We knew that that was going to happen. But when you go through that, it's so challenging.
I mean, there were days before all this happened, even, that, like, it would just be a bad day. Like, for whatever reason, that day it would hit me harder than other days, and I just would be super mean and grumpy and cry, and, like, I mean, you say that we knew we were going to have kids, and that's true, but there were days that it didn't feel like that, where it was so hard, and I just didn't know. I didn't know if that would ever happen. I think we had to wait a cycle, and then the next cycle started, and we did the same things. I think they changed dosages and all of that. But so I'm driving to Rochester every couple of days.
Sometimes 3 days a week, if not more.
Yep. And at that point, I was going mostly on my own because he had missed so much work already. that he couldn't go with me every time. And I would always schedule the earliest appointment. I'd have to leave the house at like 4 a.m. because I'd have the first like 6 a.m. appointment in Rochester and then have to rush back to my job. And I worked at a daycare, and it's not the easiest job to just at the last minute need time off. It affects everybody else in the whole building. And so I always hated that. I always felt terrible, but nobody at my job knew what was going on except for my boss, because how do you not, when you're going to need time off at the drop of a hat? You never really know when you're going to have to go. How do you not tell your boss? You have to. So she was amazing and always did whatever they needed to do to get me there, be able to leave or come in late because I would get the first appointment. And so I'd leave the house at 4 a.m. I'd get down there. I'd have my appointment. I'd drive right back to work and then work till 6 o'clock some nights and then go home. Or we were having rehearsals.
At this point, we were working with 2 different high schools on their musicals. So we were literally 7 days a week. We had rehearsals after work.
So literally like 4 a.m. till 11 p.m. I would be gone. And it was exhausting. Physically, emotionally, mentally. And the injections that I was on also make you physically uncomfortable. Like my insides, like my uterus, my ovaries, all of that was always so tender and so sore. Mood swings, hot flashes, like just it's crazy what all of those hormones can do. And so it was a rough time.
Hi. You did not sleep for very long. I love you.
Okay, so we move on to the second cycle, and it's probably end of March, beginning of April. We're doing everything the same. I think I already said all of this. We're doing everything the same, just different dosages. And I'm going to Rochester like 3 or 4 days a week. And finally, everything's looking good. We have mature follicles, and they say that we can trigger and move on with the cycle. So we do all that. 2 weeks later, which anybody who is trying to conceive knows that the 2-week wait is the longest.
Excruciating.
Oh, it's awful. It is awful. So 2 weeks later, I test and I'm pregnant again. Great. Awesome. But I'm scared because of what we had just gone through. So they do all sorts of blood work to test your levels and all of that and make sure that your levels are rising at a certain rate and all of that. Well, mine weren't rising the way that they're supposed to. We went back to Rochester to have an ultrasound to see what was going on. Hopefully everything was fine. The levels were just a little wonky. So we go back, and this is like a week before we leave for Cleveland for Isaac to have open heart surgery, because we had just found out that he had a heart condition. And from the time we found out he had a heart condition to the time he had surgery was like a month.
2 months.
2 months?
Yeah.
So that was happening at the same time. Stressful.
Excuse you.
But so a week before we leave for Cleveland, we go and have my ultrasound.
Yes.
And we find out that it's an ectopic pregnancy. So, of course, that's devastating all on its own, because we were excited and we thought that we were pregnant, and it's not going to be a viable pregnancy. So if you don't know what an ectopic pregnancy is, it means that the egg has implanted somewhere other than the uterus, where it's supposed to be.
Like in the fallopian tube.
That's one of the places that it can go. And they can be super dangerous because they can erupt and you can lose a tube. It can make you really sick. They can kill you. So it's a big deal. And we're already dealing with his heart thing. So they decide to give me methotrexate injections, and that stops the cells from dividing. Basically, it stops the baby from growing because it's not growing in the right place, and it wouldn't be a viable pregnancy anyway. So I have to have 2 of those. I have one the day we're there, I think. And then we have to go back, like, I think it was like 2 days later,
yeah.
which was the day before we left for Cleveland. So we go back and we have the second shot, and they have to monitor my blood levels. They have to keep taking blood to monitor the levels, make sure they're going down the way that they're supposed to, and the pregnancy is resolving itself. So when we're in Cleveland for his heart surgery, well, he's...
Mind you, this is the week of Mother's Day for every commercial.
Yeah. Mother's Day was like a week away because it was right after your surgery. So, while he's recovering from open heart surgery, I'm having to have my blood drawn at the clinic, at the Cleveland Clinic laboratory, and have the results sent back to the infertility doctor just to monitor things and make sure that everything is resolving itself. The methotrexate injections, I don't know if it was just me or if it's a normal thing. They made me feel like I was dying. I remember the first night that we were there. Do you remember we went out to dinner?
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up calling the doctor from the parking lot of the restaurant.
I do, and you were in tears.
Because I thought that I was dying. Like, I thought something was seriously wrong. I felt awful. They made me feel so, like, I had pains in places and my shoulder hurt, and that's like a big sign that something's wrong when you have an ectopic pregnancy, if your shoulder hurts. I don't know if maybe some of it was in my head, like I was just already nervous and scared about it, and so I was kind of manifesting these things because I was scared. But I know that I felt awful and I was terrified. And we were so far from home, and Isaac had open heart surgery, so, I mean, that's a bigger deal. And
no, it's not a bigger deal.
Yes, it is.
But it did make me completely useless.
And so
I don't know where you're going next. It was rough. We were in the hospital, and the nurses were coming in, and she's clearly upset, but they're not understanding why she's upset. So they're starting to wonder, like, if I'm in, if I'm getting the support I need. And I'm like, no, guys, just let her be. Like, she's fine. So I remember telling them.
I was so mad.
She was so pissed.
I was so mad.
They had to know, and I said, please, just let her be. She's having a miscarriage. We're having a really hard time, and
it's Mother's Day.
And it's Mother's Day, and every freaking commercial that's on TV is about Mother's Day, and people are saying, I don't know if you're a mom, but if you're a mom, happy Mother's Day, and it's just horrible, horrible stuff.
And when you're going through infertility, Mother's Day is like the worst day of the year. Worst day. Okay.
And people don't get it. Like, I mean, it's not like you're going to announce to everybody that you see, don't say anything to me about Mother's Day, but, and people are trying to be nice, but it just feels insensitive because it's everywhere. And even though their intent is good, and it's just not helpful.
From the time that you get the methotrexate shots to the actual time that you, like, shed the pregnancy, I don't know if that's really the best way of saying it, but it doesn't happen right away. So it's the worst because it's such a long process. You can't move on because it just takes so much time. So I wrote down
Yeah, it's not like you get the shot and then you're like, okay, everything's good the next day.
Yeah. So April 14th, we found out that I was pregnant. I had the first methotrexate shot on May 1st, and then I didn't actually miscarry until May 20th. So it was over a month. The whole ordeal was over a month long. And after all of that, I needed a break. It was so hard, and I couldn't imagine doing it again. I knew that I wasn't done, because obviously we still wanted our family, but I just kind of, we were done for now. And so it's not like we were preventing or not trying, but we weren't.
We stopped injections, we stopped everything. Well, and I mean, if we weren't emotionally shot, we were financially shot.
Oh my gosh.
Beyond financially shot.
That's a whole other aspect of the whole thing. It's
exhausted every penny that we had, and then some.
Yeah. Every penny that we didn't have.
Every penny that we didn't have. And then, out of the blue, we find out that I have to have open heart surgery, right, which means I'm going to be out of work, which means I'm going to get 60% of my salary. And, by the way, you have mega medical bills coming your way.
For both of us.
For both of us.
Say hi.
So yeah, we just kind of had to stop at that point and just be done with it. And
well, and emotionally, I couldn't.
Yeah. You are so thinking too. He was worth it.
Yeah, it's so hard. Like I after all of that, I probably would never have believed if you told me that my life was going to be the way that it is now, and that we'd have these guys. I probably wouldn't have believed you. So it's crazy the way that it worked out. Are you saying hi? Say hi. So we stopped actively trying. Like I said, we weren't not, but it definitely was pretty much the last thing on my mind, which is funny because it had been the only thing on my mind for all those years. Like, it's consumed every thought, every action, everything. It's the only thing I ever thought about, I feel like. So we're gonna cut it off there. I realized in the editing that we have way too much for just one video. So I'm gonna stop it there. We'll call that part 1, and I will work on part 2 and get that up in the next day or so. Hopefully there will only be 2 parts. I hope the next part's not too long also. I hope that you were able to get something out of this video. Give it a thumbs up if you were. I'd love to hear your stories. Leave comments below. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Make sure your bell notifications are on so that you get the next couple parts of our infertility story. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.